Okay, looks like we're live on the internet. Welcome everyone to another edition of Subvisual Live Talks. If you like this or you want to see anything about this or previous editions, follow us and check it out on Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, or even YouTube for Subvisual. The link is not there, but I can add later. And without further ado, today I'd like to welcome Jessica. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Louise.
So welcome to Subvisual Live Talks. Um, if you don't know the format, it's pretty easy, but I always start with the same question, which I find interesting, which is, how did you get started in tech? What brought you to this world?
I was lucky, of course, back in like the late 90s when I was in college. My aunt had a friend who worked at FedEx, and he got me in for a internship doing programming. So I was studying physics in college, but um, in ArcGIS and I found out that programming is fun. I'm good at it, and at the time, that I could uh, I could work at it during puzzle solving. It was simple tasks that they gave me as an intern. No home and have no homework. Physics. I got a programming job. I was like, I'm done with this college something hanging over your head.
Cool.
It's different
So,
now.
so you did a physics major, you said,
Mm-hmm.
and you were doing software like development on the side. I'm sure during physics major you did some development as part of the work. Oh no? Okay.
Um, yeah, but we did have the best computer lab on
Mm-hmm.
campus for strange reasons. So I wound up doing, we made our own websites um, on the Linux
Mm-hmm.
servers that we had available. And I had like CGI scripts because I think I had Maze on my site that I scripted up. So we did have
Cool. Oh
fun
yeah, sure.
stuff. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, but I was lucky because I got into like programming when we made websites. The internet wasn't really a thing.
mhm.
Google wasn't around, um, or was just starting up, so nobody found anything. and
Yeah.
and we really got to. I really got to start programming when programming was smaller in scope.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so I took a minor in computer science, and we did C and Unix.
Got it.
And back then, programming was you had the standard library, and that was it.
Right.
You didn't have an infinite number.
Yeah. I'm assuming like previous like back in those times that even learning stuff was much harder, and it would be practically impossible if you didn't have anyone to kind of guide you. It's not as easy as it is nowadays. Just go online and you have a bunch of resources, to whatever you want to do, web development or otherwise. So I'm sure that that was harder to get into, unless like there was no GitHub, right? Obviously, so no other code sharing. So that's probably harder. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it was certainly slower, but on the other hand, it in some ways it was easier because when you had a manual or a book, and that was it. It's like these days, I want to figure out how to do something in Spring, in Java with Spring, and there are so many online resources in various state of outdatedness, and a lot of them are just trying to be clickbait and get
Hmm.
ad revenue that you can't find the actual documentation, and there's too much. It was anyway, I feel lucky when I got my start when the scope was smaller and I did have the resources I
Hmm.
needed. And I didn't have an excess and pile of stuff to pick through.
No, I get that. Cool. But and then
Mm.
what was your like path or I don't know if it was a plan or just happened to be like that uh out of college and into career as a programmer.
Graduated in 99, which was a gorgeous year to
Hmm.
graduate and want to go into programming. Because that year, everybody was hiring for software engineer. So I had no trouble getting a job. Um, and plan is a strong word. I always think that the ideal is to be interested in a lot of things and then ready for what comes to
Hmm.
you.
And but
Um,
did you get into like what sort of programming were you doing at the time?
I worked at Amdocs, which was we did telecom
Hmm.
software, like customer service for telecom companies. It was it was a good place to start. And one thing I love about working in software is that we get to move between
Hmm.
industries. So I know something about cell phone
Hmm.
provisioning, and I know something about point of sale, and I know something about um, large casualty insurance, and and something about credit card payment processing. And I love getting to move between the different industries and learning something about each of them.
But at some point, you got into at least like I think that's how I first met you or heard of you was in more in the a functional side of things. So at some point, you got more interested in that, and further along, maybe also in the problem solving and more, I would say, interesting parts of being a programmer, not just the code. How is that
Yeah.
evolution for you?
So there was a major turning point in my career where I went from going home at 5:30 and not doing any programming to being fascinated by code and now by software systems. Um, and that was when I got into conference speaking.
Hmm.
Um, I approached one of my favorite conference speakers after he gave a talk at our user group, and yeah, asked him if he's going to go out for a beer later. And that was like a brilliant decision because a couple of us went out for beer, and he asked me why don't you speak at conferences? You seem pretty outgoing. Yeah, I'm pretty outgoing. Um, and I was like, oh, I'm not an expert in anything. And he was like, oh, you don't have to be an expert. You just have to learn enough to talk about it for an hour. And I was like, oh, I'm good at learning. I could do that.
So, and is that something
Um,
that you recommend still to people to just do that and speak at conferences?
it worked for me. Now, that was 9 years ago, something like
Hmm.
that. Um, and now, well, now there's not conferences, and I don't know when there
Right.
will be. But there's meetups, and there's online meetups, and there's lots of writing, and we can stream on Twitch, and we can make YouTube videos. Um, and uh, so I and blogging is probably my top thing that I would recommend to
Hmm.
people because it doesn't have the pressure of speaking in front of people. It just takes what you just learned and makes it public for other people to learn. Also, Twitter's been great.
Do you think, however,
But
that especially compared to 9 years ago, the space is way more crowded now and harder to stand out?
so, speaking of like last
Hmm.
year, before COVID canceled
Yeah, that
everything,
we're in a different.
I would say there was it was a golden age of software conferences. Um, Software development is a booming industry, and there's always more to learn, and it moves so fast that people need to keep up with it. And there's actually a ton of opportunity for people at conferences. I don't think it's too crowded, especially local conferences. Especially try to choose local speakers, and like DevOps Days is another one that always tries to get local stories on stage.
Mhm.
and from there you meet people, you go to other talks, you learn more stuff, you get new topics that you're interested in and you want to dig into and talk about next year, and that snowballs. At least it did for me.
Got it.
Now there's online meetups and we can all go to them.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, what's your opinion on even some online conferences? I've seen some conferences that are trying to host the on online version at a discount. But do you think that that's doable? Do you think like would you speak at an online conference?
So I have spoken at a couple this
Mm-hmm.
year, but that I was going to speak at in person and they moved to
Yeah.
online. Uh, the reason to speak at conferences, like, is to talk to
Mm-hmm.
people. It's to, I mean, yeah, you go to a couple talks and you learn stuff from that, but the biggest thing is that people come up and talk to you about your topic and you learn more and they ask you questions and you're like, wow, I don't know, let's find out. And then you get deeper. And crucially, you talk to the other speakers because the other speakers at conferences are also excited about programming and excited about software and learning. Um, and you don't get any of that in the online version.
Yeah.
I I I don't get any I don't get much out of it. Now, I've learned to do it anyway because it forces me to put words around the things that I'm learning and put it out there. Um,
So
but
you
it's
see
it's
speak.
upsetting. I much prefer this. I much
Okay.
prefer talking to a person.
Yeah, I've actually, well, was it RailsConf this year? They did online and they did some of interviews and stuff like that, which I think works better in this format. Yeah, for sure. Uh, I was gonna ask, so do you see preparing for talks or even just talking publicly about things as a good way of learning for you?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's a forcing function when you have to talk about something, but also write about it. This
Hmm.
works too for writing. You really have to make your model more concrete. You can't just feel like you understand it. You have to deliberately shape it in ways that not only do you have that understanding, but you have to package that understanding in a way you can give to someone else, and that leads you to discover gaps in your understanding.
Hmm.
I do a lot of, here's a concrete example. I often post on my blog if I try to find something on the internet and I don't find it or I don't find it quickly, when I finally figure it out, I put it on my blog and I make the title of the post be the thing I first searched
Hmm.
for. And more than once, I've gone to search for something and Google has taken me to my
Yeah.
own blog. I was like, oh right, good job, past me. Now I have that spell again. Um, but but when I do that, the other day it was um, converting JPA entities or converting custom fields to standard data types in the Java Spring ORM so that you can get
Hmm.
your object stuck into the database for you. Um, it when I start to write it up, then I realize, okay, but what is this always true, or do I need to check on that? And I start testing things and going a little deeper and like filling in gaps around the edges of my knowledge so that I can explain it
Hmm.
perfectly. Like exactly why do we use this particular command line option if it's a command line thing that I'm writing about, and I solidify my knowledge around it a lot by forcing myself to explain it to someone else.
Got it. In terms of both blogging and probably more in your public speaking, do you also kind of plan? We've talked about planning before, but do you plan the topics you want to talk about, or is just whatever you're currently interested in, or are you trying to find a niche of like a niche where you can be more like well known or heard?
Oh, that's a really good question because different people take different paths on that. Like I know Corey House recognized React and was like, I think this is going to be big. I'm going deep on that, and became like a known expert on it. for me, I wanted to speak at conferences, and I was not. Um, there was only one conference, No Fluff, Just Stuff, that I'd ever
Hmm.
attended. I didn't. I wasn't like in the scene, or I wasn't reading Hacker News. I still don't read Hacker News. I wasn't even on Twitter then. Um, I had a username, thank goodness, but I wasn't using it. And so I just asked, what could I speak about that I could get in at conferences with? And functional
Hmm.
programming was one of the rising hotnesses then. And another one was Android development. Conferences were looking for speakers on Android and didn't have enough of them. So knowing someone in the scene got me that information. I and so then I took the strategy of, okay, here's some things that I would like to learn more about. Here's 5 of them. Submit those things to conferences. Whatever one people pick, I'll do that. And one of those was Elasticsearch, way before Elasticsearch was popular. I was like this. We were using it at work though, and I was like, I think this would be a really good talk, and it would have been, but they didn't pick that one, so I didn't go deep on Elasticsearch. I wound up doing a few Android talks. I was like, oh, I've got an Android phone. I'm a Java developer. I can figure that out. And I did. I figured enough about out about it to do some talks my first year speaking. And after that, I was like, this is not my thing. Functional programming, I've stuck with.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
uh,
So
and
another thing about talks in general, and I think having watched some of yours, um, that there's the more technical sided talks that talk about a specific technology or something that's hot that year, and then they just go away. But there's some talks that kind of stick because they talk more about principles and things that are more generic. And I think you at least you have some tendency to go into the latter. Um, do you agree first of all, and then is that premeditated or it just happens?
so personally, yes, that's definitely a thing. Starting out, I was a lot more concrete. Um, and I've given a lot of talks about various programming languages, and it's easier to get into speaking on the concrete things. Um, and that's a good starting point. And some people stick with that and go deep on particular concrete things. But yeah, I like to go broader. One of my early talks was about Git. And while that's very specific, I think a big strength of my particular style of writing talks, okay, one of the things I like about it is that I I try to get at underlying principles. Like in Git Happens, which was my first big talk that got popular. I talk about, okay, what do we need to understand Git, and content addressable storage, one-way hashes like
Hmm.
SHA-1, um, and then directed acyclic graphs, and the underlying principles behind the technology. Because you can look up the spell, you can look up the syntax, but can you understand it when you read the help?
Hmm.
And that takes a vocabulary and a kind of a shared mental model with the people who are writing that documentation. So I even when I'm talking about something, a specific technology, I try to go abstract with it, because I feel like that's the use out of a 40-minute
Hmm.
presentation. If you want to know what to type, Google will help you with that.
Got it. No, that makes total sense.
Yeah, and over time, I've gotten more and more abstract.
Yeah, so I mentioned this a little bit before we got started, but when looking at your website, there's a bunch of references to uh, gonna help me here, semathesy.
Semathesy.
Yeah, that.
Semathesy.
Um, so
Yeah.
can you briefly explain what that is? That because as far as I could understand, is a recent word even.
Yeah, it was coined by Nora Bateson, who's an anthropologist. And she coined this from the Latin sim together and mathesy learning to describe a learning system made of learning parts.
Hmm.
Um, so things like the economy, when you look at it, it's not a system the same way your car is. Um, a car, you can figure out how the different parts work together, and maybe excluding the software bits, which are not going to be completely predictable. Um, you can eventually gain an understanding of it, because it holds still, except maybe the software
Hmm.
bits. Um, Whereas the economy is constantly changing, and all of the pieces are always learning from the other pieces. The companies are reacting to the other companies. And it's the same in ecosystems. Species find a niche or create a niche by constantly evolving in reaction to the other species. Um, and this is a much more dynamic and powerful, but also really hard to get a grasp on kind of system. And our teams are this because we learn and our team as a whole learns. And our software is included in that. I count the running software as part of the team, and part of the learning system. It's learning from us because we change it, and we learn from it because we react to the problems it has, to the ways our users react to it, um, to the tests that fail.
Got it.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and and
Samathasi.
so based off of that understanding, and obviously when you have new terminology that allows you to better talk about something, but how can you then or is it even the goal to leverage that to write better software, create better products? Like what's kind of the overarching goal for you in learning about that?
Goal is a strong
Okay.
word, but I do recognize some opportunities,
Okay.
because yeah, I'm not aiming for one thing in particular. I do want to be able to write better software and be better people.
Hmm.
Um, but when I look at my team as a Samathasy, I see a couple of things. One point is that when I think of the software as being on my team, I see it as holding knowledge, um, and um, I see it like the code being readable, for instance. That helps us learn from it. And then the tools are part of the team. So I start really appreciating how some of my knowledge of how to do my job goes into the tools, including automated tests, including queries and dashboards and scripts and the build pipeline. And I realize how important that is and spend more time on it. Uh, More recently, I just put up a blog post yesterday about this. It gives us, when we think of the learning system made of learning parts, and then the learning is the important flow in that system. And what matters is not so much what we do as what we know. Like, and this comes up in Cesar Hidalgo's book. He's a statistical physicist. He wrote "Why Information Grows," that uh, a product is packaged knowledge, and the value of our software is the knowledge that we put in it. We as developers learn about the business. We learn about large casualty insurance or point of
Hmm.
sale or telecom provisioning, and we put that knowledge into the software. And in order to do that, we have to have knowledge of the programming language, of the runtime, of the infrastructure, of the build pipelines, of the database and security and everything. It takes all of this knowledge to get it into the software. And meanwhile, we need knowledge about the business. How does this make money? What matters? And crucially, what does it integrate with? What other software does it talk to? And what people need to use it and what do they need? There's all of this knowledge that we need on our team. So I suggest that when we're defining roles on teams, software engineer or in various specialties thereof, or not specialties, focuses, um, product owner, what is a designer, what is a tester. In the past and present, we've defined those we try to write down what do they do. Well, a tester works in the software and finds problems.
Hmm.
And a software engineer, what do? We code, we implement features. And a product owner has meetings with the business. Yeah. Yeah. And they own the product backlog. But when your aim is outcomes, it doesn't pay to focus on activities. And honestly, when you describe as a software developer, if I try to describe my job to people, somebody was like, oh, well, we have these interns and they would like to know what is your day-to-day, what does a typical day look like? I'm like, I can't explain that to you. I type, I talk to people and I type in the code and I look at what it does. That's not a meaningful description of my job. It's not what I do. It's also not what I'm responsible for. Well, I keep the code clean and high quality. What is quality? Ah, everything. Um, but if you ask me what do I know? Okay, I know whatever business domain I'm working in. I know something about that. I know where my software fits in the larger system. I know a lot of how my software system works currently and some of how we want it to work. And most crucially, I know how to verify each of this knowledge. I know where to go look in the code um, to find out what it's doing in a particular area so that I can change that. I know how to test that. Um, and I know who to ask for various questions. That's a big part. So then what my day looks like is investigating, increasing that knowledge, and then talking to people so that we're sharing the knowledge between us, what I know and what you know, and then contributing that knowledge into the code and also to people. Oh, how are we going to do this user story? Well, I know this works like that, so maybe we could do it like this. I spend my day increasing and contributing that knowledge.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that's interesting idea, and there's two questions that pop to mind. And the first one is how do you because in terms of how teams are shaped up, a lot of times, as you were saying, like with the very well defined roles, uh, sometimes the developers become the team that gets user stories or whatever you're using, and it's just implement this, and you don't have access to maybe to that prior knowledge of why this is happening and all that. So
mm,
first of all is um, I'm assuming yes, but how do you shape? I'm assuming you would encourage developers to be part of that discussion, but how do you shape a team so that you have the knowledge you need to then imprint that knowledge into code? And secondly, how do you ensure that the knowledge is passed on as people come and go from the team or the company?
yeah, yeah, those are good questions, and they're questions that I think are usefully um, and asked and answered in the context of what knowledge do you need? Because yeah, what do the developers need to know? Well, they're gonna when I'm coding, um, whenever I get into a place that's really sticky and I've been working on the same thing for like hours and it's just really hard, I need to be able to step back and say, okay, wait, Jess, why are you doing this again? Um, because I'm probably going about it the wrong way. And if I step back and think about it, and oh, actually, there's an abstraction here, and if I change this over here and make generalize this a little bit, then it flows better. Or sometimes it's why are we implementing this feature? Because really, this goes against a lot of the our prior perceptions of what this app is for. Why do we collect this data anyway? Because this is financial data, and our database currently doesn't have financial data in it. And if we're going to store this in our database, we should really be encrypting our database at rest and taking extra security measures with our keys because this is just like more radioactive than the data we've been working with. And we need to be able to to find out. We don't have to already know, but we need to be able to find out the answers to these questions. So you need either the people on the team, like a business person on the team who can answer these, or relationships with those people so that we can like kind of like slurp them into the team
Mhm.
briefly to share context enough to figure it out together. My favorite way of transferring knowledge, both in this and, like you said, between new people
Mhm.
as people come and go, is mob programming. When you get the whole team in front of one task and everyone is contributing their knowledge both to that task and at the same time to each other.
Mhm.
That's a really efficient way of contributing knowledge. And when you look at our job as knowing things and contributing that knowledge, then mob programming is obviously very efficient. If you think our job is typing, it's obviously very inefficient.
So to get into that, I've actually never been part of a mob programming session. I've done pair programming.
Mhm.
Uh, well, first of all, I understand where we're coming from, where like a lot of people question, oh, there's two people doing the job of that one person could do, and then like that's uh,
Yeah, if you look at our job as
yeah.
doing, then yeah.
So, but I agree that that's like pair programming is valuable. I've never done mob programming, but do you think there's an n number of people where the like the good that comes out of it starts decreasing, or is it just exponential or linear
Oh,
in growth?
uh, that depends um, on how much the how much the knowledge is spread. If you have two people in the mob who know this, well, probably more than two. If you've got five people in the mob who all know the same
Hmm.
things, you're probably not helping unless the other people in the mob are teaching. So like we have mob programming at meetups sometimes,
Hmm.
and there's like five or six people at the front actually taking turns at the keyboard, and then there's the whole audience at the meetup. Um, because the objective of that is primarily sharing knowledge with everyone. Um, but when you have a team that works together all the time, um, then and there's and the objective that or the limitation is getting the knowledge into the code, then you need to have all the knowledge present in the mob that you need, um, but not more than that.
Hmm.
Uh, but four or five is a great number.
Got it.
I also love that like when in in pair programming, there's like this pressure to pay attention all the time. And if you go to the bathroom, then you're not pairing anymore. Whereas in a mob, if somebody gets up to pee or somebody takes a half hour phone call or goes help answer a question of someone from another team, the mob continues. The attention is not broken. I think that's kind of neat.
So it seems like you're very into this mob programming thing. I was wondering,
It's fun.
yeah, I was wondering if there's if that's the like the main thing you think the tech world needs right now, or is what other things you'd see other changes that would be good generically for tech companies, tech teams in.
Everything is relative to the current
Hmm.
situation. So right now, most people have not done mob programming. So I think it's a great thing for teams to do. Some teams do it all day, every day, but you'll get a lot of the benefits if you just do it, I don't know, for a couple hours, a couple times a week, because you still have that opportunity to share knowledge. Do the hardest stuff in a mob.
Hmm.
Um, and yet some teams aren't pair programming yet. And so if mobbing is scary, then try pairing. Pairing is Mobbing's easier though. Like I mean, as far as like,
Do you think it is? I don't know that like if there's a terminology for mob programming like the navigator, um, like there is for pair programming, but do you think I'm thinking that for someone that's part of the mob, it's probably less pressure, but maybe for the
mhm.
person that's typing, there's added pressure because there's more people there. Does that ring true or
um,
not?
um, in the mob, like when you start out, you typically follow you probably want to follow like the format where there's a formal navigator and stuff. But the one rule that you stick with, um, even after you're good at it and you don't bother with the navigating role, it's just the mob and the one person at the keyboard. The person at the keyboard doesn't make decisions.
Okay.
So it kind of separates those pressures. If you're typing, you're not making decisions.
Okay.
Um, and there you take turns, so it's not the whole time. So especially when you're getting started, you make those turns really short,
Hmm.
like just 2 to 5 minutes, um, so that you just swap that around a lot. So if that is a pressure thing, it's brief.
Ha- have
Um,
you done any session like that now being more remote, like a remote mob programming session? Does that work well?
um, as long as you can, I mean, technologically, uh, if you can all log into the same remote desktop, for
Mm,
instance, or if you can all get connected to the same VS Code session, I prefer pairing remotely to pairing in person, and mob programming is
hmm
similar. Um, yeah, and it's lower pressure because it's not just you all the time. And also, if there's one person who's being a pain in the ass, everybody can roll their eyes at them, and it's not just you suffering, which can be a problem in pair programming. A lot of people think they hate pairing
hmm
because they've paired with people who aren't good at it or aren't good at it themselves. Pairing is a skill, and I think mobbing is an easier skill.
Okay, got it. Um, okay, I have kind of diverting a little bit. So, from in your career, would you say your career has been mostly remote, or have you just moved around a lot?
Been remote for like 5 years.
Got it. I was
Um,
briefly looking over LinkedIn, and I don't know how exactly up to date that is, but I noticed there was a stint that you went to that I found particularly interesting that you were working at Stripe in San Francisco. What was
that was
Oh, that
remote
was
too.
remote. Okay. I was gonna ask because that's usually like a different and sometimes hard town to get into, and cultural wise.
Mm,
And I was just interested, how how was that like working in that environment?
um, yeah, Stripe is amazing. Highly recommend as an employer and like as a company to do business
hmm
with. Um, and I worked remotely for them, and of course, I got into that by conference
hmm
speaking. I met people at conferences, and so that's a major use of conference speaking is getting into the really interesting jobs. You need to meet the interesting people. Um, it was really different because working in companies here in the Midwest, um, in a lot of ways, like the working at Stripe was a lot more fun because there's a big variety of people. Everyone's enthusiastic. Everyone's super smart. Lots of people type in Dvorak,
What? I was not expecting that one. Okay. Yeah.
right? It's just like this is an interesting pattern. But they're all people who like take programming so seriously that a lot of them have switched keyboard layouts. I did Dvorak for a while, but I don't. I did it for like 5 years and then decided it
hmm
wasn't helping me. But it was interesting to see like that kind of people who take this seriously. But everyone's also like nice and has most people have interesting hobbies outside of work, and that was fun. It was weird. I felt old being like in my late 30s,
Okay.
and that was different. Because it the people would be like, "Oh, are you relocating to San Francisco?" And I'd say, "I have kids," and they'd be like, "Oh, there's very few people in San Francisco have kids because it's not
Right.
affordable." Um,
Yeah, I was just wondering culturally
uh,
if it was like a shock, even for you being from the US, but if it was a shock with all the tech, as you're saying, young people tech culture.
intensity of it, and it definitely was like in the Midwest. You get the big fish, small pond thing going on, where when I'm going out to a bunch of conferences and nobody else I work with does that.
hmm
Whereas then when I go to Stripe, a lot of other people speak at conferences, and this is totally normal. And that was really fun. I got to work with Julia Evans, who was on my team.
Cool.
Um, yeah, and that was great. I learned a lot. I only left because the opportunity at Atomist was super interesting to me, early startup kind of thing.
Got it.
And yeah, I mean, I recommend it if you can, if you can get into it. But being remote made it like I didn't have to move to San Francisco. I didn't have to up my life. I didn't have
Yeah.
to live in a place where the billboards are targeted at developers, which is bizarre.
Do you think that, um, kind of a random question, but do you think that with this whole situation now, that more companies will be open to more remote jobs in the future, and how will that shape our industry?
Yeah, I mean that's like a clear benefit of this pandemic is that companies have been forced to try working at home, and a lot of them have found out that it works. Um, and a lot of them will not force people to go back. And like and like agile coaching is instead of fly everywhere, fly out Monday, fly back Thursday, to get to wherever the client is. It's probably a lot of it's going to stay dial in.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
the airlines will never be the same, but that's good. That part is good for the ozone.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of good things about that specific part of it, but we'll see. We'll see in the next few years how that grows. Anyway,
Yeah.
there was a topic that you say you wanted to get into, and I'm interested in, because I don't know what's going to come out of it, which is you said you're now, like, learning more about plants, or and
Plants, plants. So I somebody on Twitter linked this paper, um, from uh, ecological psychology, I think, but it's and robotics. Um, I'm very into systems thinking
hmm
and how that applies to software systems. Um, that's where Zamith comes
hmm
from, but also there's a lot of interesting stuff in ecology that applies directly to software. And this paper, um, it's about hold on, I have about 6 copies of it because I had a fight with my printer. Plant bio-inspired ecological robotics.
okay.
And it starts out plants are movers, but not like us that move our bodies from point A to point
hmm
B. Plants grow to where they are going. And I find this concept fascinating. Plants, like especially a vine. A vine is like a fast moving plant but it doesn't like pick up and move. It extends itself. It is morphologically plastic. It and when it does, when you look at a vine, you can't see it moving.
hmm
But if you get on a time lapse camera, you see that it's doing this thing over the course of hours. And then it's got these little tendrils that are like whipping around at the pace of hours and days.
hmm
Um, so slower than our eyes notice, but whipping around until they find something, and then they grow around it in circles. Um, and so plants move by growing. They don't abandon where they were. And I think software needs to do this too. It does this too. If you have production software with existing customers and you're growing your software, you're adding to your API, you're moving in new directions, you want to be able to serve this segment, you continue to serve those customers. You maintain backwards compatibility. Um, you don't just stop and start and move over here. You don't follow a roadmap from A to B.
hmm
You need to be A and B if you value your customers, if you value the ecosystem that you're entwined with. Um, and that's not how we're used. But now that our software talks to software and it needs to continue even as it grows, I think we need to think of ourselves as moving by growing to where we're going
Hmm.
and continuing to care about stuff that we're not like actively changing on. If nothing else, we need to keep it safe. And there's new insects, by which I mean security vulnerabilities, all the time that we need to keep the existing pieces of our plant healthy, even while we grow the new bits.
Yeah. So, but I understand the analogy there, but do you think there's more than that, like that you can go deeper in the analogy, or that it breaks down after that?
Some directions of both. What were you thinking of?
I mean, I understand. Okay, you're talking plants grow to where they want to be, and I understand, or well, they need to be, something like that. And that relates to the evolving system in like production code, where you just, well, maybe sometimes, but usually you just don't throw everything away and start fresh. Like you have to build on top of what you had. But is there anything more you think in plants and ecology that you can learn and bring into your understanding of a production system? Uh, Other than that, I mean, is like anything else you're planning on exploring in that space?
Mm. Some possibilities include, like in forests, the trees are healthier in a forest than alone.
Hmm,
Um, they actually like compensate for each other. If one tree gets sick, the other trees will feed it through its roots.
you know that.
Will actually take some of their own stores of nutrients and pass it to the injured tree. Which reminds me of in software, sometimes even in production software, even without people in intervening, we now care about back pressure and we care about exponential back off, and we have that kind of like empathy between one software system and
Hmm.
another, so that because the uh, pieces of our system are always failing, but can the system as a whole be more stable than the individual parts? Because if everything is
Hmm.
dependent on everything else all the time,
Hmm.
then when one goes out, everything fails. If your health check depends on all your dependent services responding positively to their health check, and their health check depends on a positive health check from everything else, then one thing goes out, everything is down, everything is doomed. We become more and more fragile as we build the system. Whereas when we accept that our pieces are interdependent, and I depend on this system, but if it's being slow, I'm going to reduce requests to it instead of sending it more.
Hmm.
Um, then we can wind up with a system that is more stable than any individual part. That's kind of
Yeah,
amazing.
that's pretty interesting to me because I've been doing a lot of Elixir in the past 3 years, and that resonates a lot with the
Mm-hmm.
Erlang Elixir philosophy from the VM, where you have like just the actor model basically, right? So with the whole, all different processes running, and they talk to each other, but if one goes down, the others keep going, and then this one is spun up again. Um, and I think that comes a lot also from that resilience you're talking about, from the particular pain point that Ericsson was trying to solve right back in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
90s, when they built Erlang.
80s,
Um,
70s.
yeah, right. So yeah, it resonates a lot with that. I don't know your familiarity with the Erlang ecosystem, but is that something that interests you? That sort of like the actor model in general?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, Erlang did it right, and that's they built the best runtime. Um, and I love Elixir because now you have a good language. Okay, I'm sorry. Erlang is a good language. It's just a hard to use language. And actually, Erlang is a lot better because of Elixir,
Hmm.
because Elixir welcomed all these people into the community who have standards for how easy
Hmm.
languages to use and troubleshooting. And so now you have like line numbers in your stack traces. Um,
Yeah, and the Elixir community has also been contributing a lot to OTP and Erlang. and they've been growing together, and it's been good in that sense.
Yeah, it's beautiful. The Elixir community has really influenced the Erlang community positively, and now the Erlang community is nicer and bigger and healthier, and
So you
yeah,
think,
it's good.
at least in your understanding, obviously, yeah, it will be an up and coming like framework way of thinking, or even just the language in Elixir.
Yeah, I hope so, because if people are serious about really good performance in their service in the back end, then man, that's the way to go. Um, there's a lot of other influences on what language
Hmm.
people
Yeah,
use than what works the best. And that's legit. You go with what you're used to because that's what you can do the best job in.
and
Um,
it's not
but
perfect by any means, by the way, for anyone listening that hasn't experimented with Elixir. There's issues with, as with any language or
yeah.
runtime, but conceptually, I do agree that it makes a lot of sense in the world that we live in now, tech wise.
And the like the tools, the visibility you have into what's
Hmm.
going on in the runtime is a different level, a higher standard in the Erlang ecosystem. And it's very cool. It's also what object oriented programming wanted to be.
Right. The whole like small little objects passing messages around. Hmm.
Hmm.
I see that.
Yeah, Erlang's the only real object oriented language in Elixir.
Which is interesting because they put themselves out there as a functional language, which
Right. Which,
they're.
well, but they do it right. Within an actor, it's functional. And outside of an actor, it's
Hmm.
entirely message oriented.
I'm interested in one thing, by the way, because I was gonna say that I don't think Elixir is very functional, but yeah, it kind of is. It does work with functions and all that, even though, uh,
Immutability by
yeah,
default.
some of that stuff, but it doesn't have like a rigid type
Like,
system. Yeah, basically, or any type system that you can actually really use. But uh, in your experience with other functional languages that have strong type systems, do you think that's something that's needed, even with a runtime? Like, would you want that?
so the most important parts of principles from functional programming are immutability by
Hmm.
default and referential transparency. Like, don't do side effects or make them explicit. And you get that
Hmm.
in Erlang and Elixir. I mean, your side effects are sending messages typically, and you can encapsulate those. Um, and uh, and you get the immutability, which is a big deal. Now, when you get into the serious functional program, the other aspect of what functional programming is named after is the passing of functions as
Hmm.
values, which is important because you can like transfer the responsibility for iteration into the list instead of having to iterate over the list from the outside when you call map or filter. Um, and for stuff like that, it works totally fine in an untyped language. But when you get into passing functions that take functions, or um, really, it happens pretty quickly when I'm passing something and then I need to take a function. And what is that function going to get? So I worked in Clojure for a
Hmm.
year, and it drove me flipping nuts when you pass the wrong kind of function in. Well, what was the problem? What is that function supposed to get? What is that function supposed to output? If you're using the standard library, okay, there's documentation, but if you're using a function somebody else wrote, go look at the code. They say, I don't want to read your code. I want to know what it needs so I can call it correctly. The whole point is that not having to understand the implementation. Um, and so that's where types become really important to me. So I like TypeScript a lot. I don't need um, I don't need really elaborate type systems. I don't even. gradual typing is fine. I don't need types 100% all over the place. But if I'm going to pass you a function, it helps so much to know whether I'm passing the right
Hmm.
type of function and to be able to keep track of what they
Yeah.
are.
One thing, and you can tell me if it resonates with you, but one thing that I miss a lot in Elixir that I see in other languages is something like result type or option slash maybe type, in the sense
Hmm.
that uh, a function can return something, or a function can have an argument, and then I use that argument as if it exists, and this is the true in
Mm.
Ruby as well, and other languages like that. But then it might be null, and then I get a runtime error, and I don't get a compile time error. And so that's something that I really value, when you can get a compile time error telling you, hey, uh, this can be null, so you might as well deal with it, or tell me explicitly that you don't care
Yeah.
about it, or it's handled somewhere else, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that is really nice. I mean, even like Go is big on you always check for
Hmm.
error
Yeah, but Go,
and it
yeah,
beats you.
I don't know if I haven't.
It has enough typing to make you
Yeah, so I mean that's
almost
the
good.
main thing I miss in Elixir, that I would be very happy if it had. I'm sure a lot of people would
Yeah.
complain a lot about the compiler
Yeah.
if it did that, but
But I well see this I love TypeScript for this because once you're in
hmm
TypeScript, you don't have to type everything. Um, so I really like using TypeScript, but at a low level of
hmm
strictness um, until I want to harden things, because then I can type the things that are important to type and not worry about everything in the world. And if I want to like override that stuff, I can cast it as any for the time being. And then later, I can have the linter complain about that. I love that TypeScript like divides these problems. Some of them come from the compiler and some of them come from the
hmm
linter. And in both cases, you can like change the rules. You can always opt out by
hmm
line. So you can get really specific about what you care about and where. That makes me happy.
Well, Jessica, we're almost out of time, so I would like, as a last question, ask you if there's anything you want to plug here, or want to tell us about that, where we can know more about what you're doing and follow you.
Yeah, thanks. You can read my blog at jessitron.com/blog, or Twitter is Jessitron, Jessitron. And if you want to hear like what I'm thinking about um, currently and get like, I publish my blog posts, most of them on my newsletter, and then I add a little personal section that is not published online. It only goes out to newsletter
Mhm.
recipients. Yeah, free newsletter at newsletter.jessitron.com.
Okay. Awesome. That sounds pretty easy to find. For people watching here on Twitch, your Twitter handle is shown on screen, so you can see there, and it's the same name.com, and find everything. That's pretty easy. Again, Jessica, thanks so much for accepting the challenge, for accepting to come to this interview.
Thank you for inviting me, Louise.
No problem. Was great having you. I had a lot of fun in this talk, and I learned some more about plants. That was also very interesting. Um, yeah, so thanks.
Thank you.
Um, and so this was another edition of Subvisual Live Talks, as I said in the beginning, but for those that weren't here, please follow us in all of the social media below. We'll be posting whenever we have news or new guests lined up. It will be posted there, especially Twitter. So follow us. See you next week. Bye.